My name is Amber Wilson, and I'm 27 years old. I still remember the gleam of silverware at that upscale Boston restaurant where I took my mother Diane for her 50th birthday. The candle flickered across her face when she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "The best gift you could give me would be if you just left my life." Her words froze my blood. That night, I decided to grant her wish completely. I disappeared without a trace, remaking myself from scratch. Before I share how I vanished and what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to make a painful break from someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally. I grew up in a picture-perfect colonial house in suburban Massachusetts, the kind with hydrangeas lining the walkway and a perfectly manicured lawn. From the outside, we looked like the ideal American family: mother, father, and one daughter. But appearances can be deceiving. My mother, Diane Wilson, was what people politely call exacting. What they don't say is that she was impossible to please. Everything in our house had to be perfect, from the strategically placed throw pillows that no one was allowed to actually use, to the color-coordinated pantry where cans were arranged by expiration date and size. But her perfectionism didn't just apply to our home, it applied to me as well. From the moment I could walk, I became her project. Ballet lessons started at age 3 because posture is everything, Amber. Piano at 4 because cultured girls play an instrument. Advanced reading classes at 5 because you'll never get ahead if you're average. Nothing I did was ever enough. B+ in math again, she'd say, barely glancing at my report card. Jessica Thompson's daughter got straight A's, and she's juggling debate team too. My father, Robert, was physically present but emotionally absent. A financial advisor who worked long hours, he'd come home, kiss my mother on the cheek, ask about my day without listening to the answer, then retreat to his study. Whenever my mother's criticism escalated, he'd simply say, "Your mother wants what's best for you, Amber." It was easier for him to surrender than to stand up to the hurricane that was Diane Wilson. When I was 12, I won second place in a regional spelling bee. I still remember the word that tripped me up: dichotomy. Oh, the irony. When I showed my mother the silver medal, her lips tightened. "Silver is just a shiny word for first loser," she said, placing the medal in a drawer instead of on the mantle where all our neighbors could display their children's achievements. Next time, prepare harder. My teenage years became a battleground. Every normal adolescent desire, to wear makeup, to go to school dances, to hang out with friends at the mall, turned into a negotiation, with my mother holding all the cards. "Those girls are a bad influence," she'd say about the friends I brought home. Their mothers let them run wild. When I was 16, I dyed a streak of my hair purple. It was a small rebellion, but to my mother, it might as well have been a face tattoo. "Do you want people to think I'm raising some kind of delinquent?" she hissed, driving me straight to the salon to have it fixed. "What will the Johnsons think when they see you at church?" The only thing that kept me going was the promise of escape. I applied to colleges as far from Boston as I could, secretly hoping for California or even Hawaii. I got into Northwestern University in Chicago, not quite the distance I'd hoped for, but still 1,000 miles between me and Diane's cutting remarks. The day I left for college was the first time I felt like I could breathe. My dorm room was tiny, my roommate was messy, and the cafeteria food was questionable at best, but none of that mattered. I was free. Of course, freedom is relative when your mother calls every day, questioning your class choices, your eating habits, your new friends. I started forgetting to charge my phone. Our conversations dwindled to once a week, then twice a month. Each call left me drained, my roommate bringing me ice cream as I lay staring at the ceiling afterward, emotionally depleted. "Your mom again?" she'd ask, and I'd just nod. I majored in English literature, not the pre-law track my mother had insisted upon. "English," she'd scoffed when I told her. "Planning on being unemployed after graduation?" "No one pays for poetry, Amber." But I loved it. For the first time in my life, I was studying something because I wanted to, not because it would look good on a resume or impress my mother's friends. I joined the college newspaper, discovered a passion for photography, and even dated a musician for a while, something that would have sent my mother into conniptions. After graduation, reality hit. The job market for English majors wasn't exactly booming, and my student loans weren't going to pay themselves. After 6 months of rejections and part-time gigs, I reluctantly returned to Boston. My father welcomed me home with an awkward hug. My mother welcomed me with a list of marketing positions she'd compiled. The miller's daughter works at Deloitte. She informed me over dinner my first night back. They could put in a word. I found a job at a small publishing house instead, editing manuscripts for barely enough to afford a shared apartment with 2 other girls in Somerville. My mother viewed my independence as another disappointment. You could live at home and save money, she'd suggest, which both of us knew wasn't about financial prudence, but about bringing me back under her control. For 5 years, I attempted to build an adult relationship with my mother. I invited her to lunch every other Sunday. I sent thoughtful cards on holidays. I called regularly. But no matter how I approached her, the dynamic remained unchanged. "That skirt is a bit tight for your figure, don't you think?" she'd say over brunch. 30 is coming up fast. Jennifer's daughter just got engaged to a doctor. Publishing is fine for now, but you should be thinking about a real career path. Each interaction left me feeling like I was still that little girl, desperately seeking approval that would never come. But I kept trying, believing that somehow, someday, my mother would really see me, and be proud of the woman I'd become. That hope led me to plan something special for her 50th birthday. I saved for months to afford a reservation at Sorellina, one of Boston's most exclusive Italian restaurants. I bought her a pearl necklace that cost nearly a month's rent. I even wore the conservative blue dress she'd given me last Christmas, though I hated how it washed out my complexion. This will be different, I told myself as I got ready that evening. Tonight is about her. It will be perfect. I had no idea that perfect would mean the complete destruction of whatever relationship we had left. Sorellina was everything you'd expect from a high-end Boston restaurant: soft lighting, white tablecloths, waiters who seemed to materialize precisely when needed and disappear when not. I'd made the reservation a month in advance, requesting a quiet corner table with a view of the public garden. I arrived 15 minutes early, nervously checking my appearance in the restroom mirror, tucking stray hairs back into place. My mother detested tardiness, considering it a personal affront. She arrived exactly on time, of course. Diane Wilson didn't believe in being fashionably late. She entered the restaurant like she owned it, her camel hair coat draped perfectly over her shoulders, her blonde hair, colored to hide any hint of gray, styled in a sleek bob. Several heads turned as she walked in, commanding attention without trying. "Amber," she said, kissing my cheek. "You found the place all right." It wasn't a question. She handed her coat to the maitre d' and slid gracefully into her seat, surveying the restaurant with a critical eye. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, pushing a small blue box across the table. I wanted tonight to be special. Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps even a moment of genuine pleasure. She opened the box carefully, her manicured fingers lifting the pearl necklace. "South Sea pearls," she observed, holding them up to the light. "Quality ones." Coming from my mother, this was effusive praise. I felt a flutter of hope. "I thought they'd look beautiful with that cream suit you wear to charity functions," I said, smiling. She nodded, placing them back in the box without putting them on. "Thank you. I'll wear them to the hospital board dinner next month." The waiter appeared with the wine list, and my mother ordered an expensive Barolo without consulting me. I didn't mind, tonight was her night, and I'd budgeted for extravagance. For the first 30 minutes, everything went surprisingly well. We discussed neutral topics: a new exhibit at the MFA, my father's golf game, her garden club's upcoming competition. The appetizers were exquisite, the wine smooth and rich. I began to relax, thinking perhaps I'd been overthinking things. Maybe turning 50 had softened her somehow. "So," she said, setting down her wine glass precisely on its water spot, "are you still at that little publishing company?" And just like that, the tension returned. "Yes," I replied, cutting a piece of my truffle ravioli. "Actually, I got promoted to senior editor last month." She said, in that tone that managed to convey both acknowledgement and dismissal simultaneously. "And what does a senior editor make these days?" Before I could answer, she continued. The Henderson's daughter. You remember Laura? She was in your high school class, though I believe she went to Princeton. She just made partner at her law firm. 32 years old. Her mother says she's already put a down payment on a brownstone in Beacon Hill. That's nice for her, I managed, taking a large sip of wine. And are you seeing anyone? She asked, though she knew I wasn't. If I had been, she would have subjected him to the 3rd degree long before now. I'm focusing on my career right now, I said, the standard response. She sighed, a sound I'd heard countless times throughout my life. It conveyed so much, disappointment, resignation, judgment, all without words. You know, Amber, at your age, I was already married with a child and managing a household. Your generation seems to think youth lasts forever. I felt my chest tighten. Times are different now, Mom. Women have more options. Options, she repeated, as if the word tasted sour. Is that what you call it? Living in that cramped apartment with roommates, working at a job that barely pays the bills, no husband, no children, no real assets to speak of. I set down my fork, my appetite vanishing. I'm happy with my life. Are you? She asked, her eyes sharp. Because from where I sit, it looks like you're drifting. No direction, no ambition. Just existing. The waiter chose that moment to check on us. I forced a smile, assuring him everything was delicious. As soon as he left, my mother leaned forward. You know what your problem is, Amber? You've always settled for mediocrity. I tried to push you, to help you reach your potential, but you've resisted me at every turn. Push me? I repeated, incredulous. Is that what you call it? Yes, she said firmly. Someone had to have high standards in this family. Your father would have let you do whatever you wanted, consequences be damned. Maybe he understood that I needed to make my own choices, my own mistakes. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. And look where that got you. 27, nothing to show for it. Do you think this is what I dreamed of for my only child? Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration bubbled to the surface. What about what I dreamed for myself, Mom? Did that ever matter to you? Did you ever once ask me what I wanted? I wanted what was best for you, she said, her voice rising slightly. No, I countered. You wanted what looked best to your friends, to your social circle. You wanted a daughter you could brag about, not one you actually knew. Her face hardened. That's nonsense. I've sacrificed everything for you. Sacrificed. I was nearly speechless. What exactly did you sacrifice, Mom? Your time? Because from where I'm sitting, you spent most of my childhood criticizing me, not supporting me. I won't be spoken to this way, she said, reaching for her water glass with a slightly trembling hand. Especially not on my birthday. I'm sorry, I said, not feeling sorry at all. I just thought, for once, we could have an honest conversation. Honest? She repeated. You want honesty? Fine. I think you've wasted your potential. I think you're hiding in that little job because you're afraid of real challenge. I think you're alone because you sabotage any relationship that might actually lead somewhere. Each word was like a slap. I sat there, absorbing the blows, too stunned to respond. I've spent decades watching you make one poor decision after another, she continued, her voice cold and precise. Do you know how that feels as a mother? To watch your child deliberately choose mediocrity. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of her. I'm sorry I've been such a disappointment to you, I said quietly. She sighed again, setting her napkin beside her plate. You know what, Amber? I've been thinking a lot about what I want at this stage of my life. Your father and I have our social obligations, our charity work. We're planning to travel more now that he's cutting back his hours. She looked at me directly, her blue eyes, so like my own, utterly devoid of warmth. If you really want to give me something for my birthday, something that would actually make me happy. She paused, as if considering her words carefully. The best gift would be if you just left my life. The restaurant around us continued as before, soft murmurs of conversation, the clink of silverware against fine china, waiters gliding between tables, but for me, everything stopped. Time froze in that moment, preserving it like an insect in amber. How fitting. You don't mean that, I whispered, though I knew she did. My mother never said anything she didn't mean. I do, she replied, dabbing at the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "I'm tired, Amber. Tired of the disappointment, tired of the arguments, tired of watching you waste your life. Maybe a clean break would be best for both of us." I sat there, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. The pearl necklace still sat in its box between us, catching the candlelight. "I think I should go," I finally managed, reaching for my purse with numb fingers. "Yes, I think that would be best," she agreed, as if we were concluding a business meeting rather than severing a maternal bond. "Thank you for dinner." I stood on shaky legs, nearly knocking over my chair. Without another word, I walked out of the restaurant, past curious glances from other diners who must have sensed the drama unfolding. Outside, the cold March air hit me like a physical blow. I gulped it down, trying to steady myself as tears finally spilled over. A text pinged on my phone as I stood there. From my mother, "I've called a car. No need to wait." Even in this moment, she maintained her perfect facade. Wouldn't want the other diners to see Diane Wilson abandoned on her birthday. What would people think? I flagged down a taxi, gave my address in a voice I barely recognized as my own, and spent the ride home staring out the window at the Boston streets, seeing nothing. All I could hear was my mother's voice, playing on repeat. "The best gift would be if you just left my life." By the time I reached my apartment, a strange calm had settled over me. My roommates were out, thank God. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. "Left my life," I whispered to the empty room. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mother's words echoed in my mind like a broken record. "The best gift would be if you just left my life." After 27 years of trying to be good enough, trying to please her, trying to earn her love, she had made it crystal clear she didn't want me in her life at all. As the hours ticked by, my initial shock and hurt gradually crystallized into something else: resolve. If disappearing was what she wanted, then I would give her exactly that. Not just the silent treatment or reduced contact, but a complete vanishing act. I would grant her birthday wish so thoroughly that she'd never find a trace of Amber Wilson again. By dawn, I had a plan. First came the practical considerations. I had about $11,000 in savings, not much, but enough to disappear if I was careful. I called in sick to work, then sent an email to my boss explaining that I was resigning effective immediately due to a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. Next, I went to my bank and closed my accounts, withdrawing everything in cash. The teller raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. I stopped by the post office and filled out a change of address form, forwarding my mail to a P.O. box I'd never check. I called my landlord, explaining that an emergency had come up and I needed to break my lease. I paid the penalty from my cash reserves without complaint. I sold my car to a dealership for far less than it was worth, accepting the hit for the sake of speed. I listed my furniture on various marketplace apps, marking everything for quick sale. By the end of that day, my apartment was half empty, my life reduced to what could fit in 2 suitcases. The digital footprint was trickier. I deactivated all my social media accounts rather than deleting them. A sudden disappearance from online platforms might raise alarms. I changed the passwords on my email accounts to random strings I'd never remember, effectively locking myself out. I factory reset my phone and purchased a prepaid one with cash from a convenience store. My roommates were confused by my sudden departure, but I fed them the same story: family emergency, needed to move immediately. They were nice girls, but we weren't close enough for them to question my explanation too deeply. I left them extra money for the inconvenience and promised to stay in touch, knowing I never would. The hardest part was sorting through my belongings. Every object seemed to carry memories, some painful, some precious. My college diploma, photo albums, books I'd loved, souvenirs from trips, gifts from the few friends I'd made over the years. In the end, I was ruthless. Anything that couldn't fit in my suitcases had to go. I donated most of it to Goodwill, anonymously dropping bags off after hours. What about people who might miss me? The sad truth was, there weren't many. I had colleagues, not friends, at the publishing house. My college friends had scattered across the country, our relationships maintained through occasional likes on social media. My father would notice my absence eventually, but he'd always followed my mother's lead. If she said I was gone, he'd accept it. 3 days after the birthday dinner, I stood in my nearly empty apartment for the last time. The bare walls and vacant spaces reflected how I felt inside, hollowed out, scraped clean, ready to be filled with something new. I'd purchased a bus ticket to Portland, Maine, close enough to reach easily, far enough to be a fresh start. I chose it partly for its manageable cost of living, partly because I'd visited once in college and remembered liking its small city feel. Most importantly, it wasn't Boston. That last night, I slept on the floor in a sleeping bag, my 2 suitcases packed and ready by the door. I'd kept only the essentials: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, a few books, and 1 photo. Not of my family, but of the view from my dorm room window at Northwestern, the place where I'd first tasted freedom. As I lay there in the dark, I wondered if I was overreacting. Was disappearing really the answer? But then I remembered every cutting remark, every disappointed sigh, every comparison to someone else's more successful daughter. I remembered the cold look in my mother's eyes as she dismissed me from her life. The best gift would be if you just left my life. Well, Mother, I thought, happy birthday. I hope you enjoy your gift. The next morning, I took one final look around the apartment, left the keys on the counter, and walked out. I caught a rideshare to the bus station, paid cash for my ticket, and boarded the 9:15 to Portland. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched Boston recede through the window, the skyline growing smaller until it disappeared completely. I felt numb, then sad, then unexpectedly light. Like I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for 27 years. For the first time in my life, no one knew where I was or what I was doing. No one was judging my choices or finding them wanting. No one was comparing me to Jennifer's daughter or the Hendersons' Laura. I was just a woman on a bus, heading north. A blank page. A ghost. When I arrived in Portland that evening, I checked into a small motel near the bus station, paying cash and using the name Jessica Bryant, a combination of my college roommate's first name and the street I grew up on. The woman at the desk barely glanced at me, just pushed a key across the counter and pointed toward my room. That night, in a strange bed in a strange city under a borrowed name, I cried until I had no tears left. Not for my mother, but for the Amber Wilson I was leaving behind. The girl who had tried so hard for so long to be loved by someone incapable of giving that love freely. The woman who had defined herself by another's impossible standards. In the morning, Jessica Bryant would begin her new life. But for these last few hours, I mourned Amber Wilson and all the years she'd spent chasing approval that never came. Portland, Maine greeted me with a week of relentless rain, as if the city itself was weeping for my old life. I spent the first 3 days huddled in my motel room, venturing out only for vending machine snacks and to buy a cheap umbrella from the dollar store next door. The rain matched my mood, gray, persistent, isolating. Reality set in quickly. My savings wouldn't last long, even with my frugal spending habits. I needed income, housing, and some semblance of a normal life. But how do you build a life when you're pretending to be someone else? On day 4, I forced myself out into the drizzle, armed with a stack of resumes printed at the motel's business center. The resumes listed Jessica Bryant's experience. A watered-down version of my actual work history, minus specific company names and dates that could be easily verified. I claimed to have worked at small publishing houses in Chicago, explaining my lack of references by saying they had gone out of business. I applied at bookstores, cafes, restaurants, anywhere that might hire someone with minimal questions. Most places took one look at my overqualified resume and politely declined. "You'd get bored here," one manager told me kindly. If only he knew that boredom was the least of my concerns. On my 7th day in Portland, desperation mounting as my cash dwindled, I walked into a diner called the Blue Plate. The laminated menu featured breakfast all day. The booths were worn but clean, and classic rock played softly from speakers in the ceiling. The manager, Mike, a barrel-chested man with a graying beard, interviewed me on the spot. Ever waited tables before? He asked, eyeing my resume skeptically. In college, I lied. To pay tuition. This ain't glamorous work, he warned. Customers can be demanding, hours are long, pays mostly tips. I need the job, I said simply. I'll work hard. Something in my expression must have convinced him. All right, Jessica. Be here tomorrow at 6. We'll see how you do. I nearly cried with relief. The work was exhausting. My feet ached, my back screamed, and my hands were constantly chapped from sanitizer and hot water. But there was something honest about it, carrying plates, refilling coffee, smiling at regulars. No one expected perfection. No one compared me to the waitress at the next diner over. I either did my job well or I didn't. After 2 weeks of double shifts, I had enough for a security deposit on the tiniest studio apartment I'd ever seen. It was on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house, with slanted ceilings and a shower so small I had to soap up in sections. But it was mine, or rather Jessica's. Furnishing it was an exercise in extreme budgeting. A mattress on the floor, a folding table and chair from Goodwill, mismatched dishes from the dollar store. I hung a single poster, a vintage travel advertisement for Maine, to make the blank walls feel less empty. The physical challenges of my new life were difficult, but manageable. The emotional ones were harder. Nightmares plagued me, dreams where my mother found me, her cold eyes assessing my new life and finding it pathetic. I'd wake gasping, heart pounding, certain she was in the room with me. During daylight hours, paranoia was my constant companion. I'd see a woman with a blonde bob at the grocery store and duck into another aisle, certain it was Diane. A car that drove past my apartment building twice might be a private investigator. A customer who asked too many questions at the diner could be gathering information. The isolation was crushing. I spoke to people all day, taking orders, making small talk, but none of them knew me. Not even the fake me I was pretending to be. I'd crafted a backstory for Jessica, grew up in the Midwest, parents deceased, no siblings, moved to Portland for a fresh start after a bad breakup. Simple, vague, impossible to verify, and designed to discourage further questions. When coworkers invited me out for drinks after shifts, I always declined. Getting close to anyone meant risking exposure. One drunken conversation, one slip about my real hometown or college or family, and my cover would be blown. So I kept to myself, becoming known as the quiet, private waitress who did her job well but never socialized. The panic attacks started about a month after I arrived. The first one hit while I was carrying a tray of pancakes to a family of 4. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled, my hands shook, and I barely made it to the kitchen before the tray clattered to the floor, syrup and butter spattering everywhere. "You okay, Jessica?" Mike asked, concern etched on his weathered face as I crouched on the floor, trying to gather broken pieces of plate with trembling hands. "Fine," I gasped. "Just clumsy." But it happened again. And again. In my apartment. On the bus. Walking down the street. The weight of my lies, my isolation, my grief for my old life, it all came crashing down in moments of pure, animal panic. I started journaling as a way to cope, filling pages with the truth I couldn't speak aloud. I wrote about my mother, about growing up never feeling good enough, about the birthday dinner that had broken me. I wrote about the guilt of abandoning my father, the only person who might actually miss me. I wrote until my hand cramped and tears blurred the ink. One rainy Tuesday, about 2 months into my new life, a coworker named Tara followed me out after our shift ended. "Hey, Jessica," she called, jogging to catch up. "Some of us are grabbing food at that new Thai place. You should come." Tara was about my age, with bright red hair and a constellation of freckles across her nose. She always wore mismatched socks and had a laugh that made customers smile involuntarily. I'd caught myself envying her easy confidence, her apparent comfort in her own skin. "I can't tonight," I said automatically. "I have plans." "You always have plans," she said, not unkindly. "Look, I get it. New city, new job, it's overwhelming. But Portland's more fun with friends." Something in her expression, genuine kindness with no agenda, made my carefully constructed walls waver. "Maybe next time," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Tara smiled. I'll hold you to that, Bryant. It was a small moment, but it felt like the first real human connection I'd had since arriving in Portland. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in weeks. The next morning, my phone rang, my new prepaid phone that almost never rang. It was Mike from the diner. Jessica, he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. There was a man here asking about you. My blood turned to ice. What? Who? Didn't give a name. Well-dressed older guy. Said he was looking for his daughter, showed a picture that looked kinda like you, but with different hair. Said she might be using another name. My father? A private investigator? My panic must have transmitted through the phone because Mike quickly added, I told him I didn't know anyone by that name. But Jessica, or whatever your name is, if you're in some kind of trouble. I'm not, I said quickly. It's complicated, but I'm not dangerous or wanted by the police or anything. I promise. A long pause. Okay, I believe you. But this guy seemed pretty determined. Just thought you should know. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately began packing. My mother had found me, or at least, she was looking. The fragile sense of security I'd built over the past 2 months shattered instantly. Portland wasn't far enough. Jessica Bryant wasn't different enough. I needed to disappear again, more thoroughly this time. And I needed to go much, much farther away. With shaking hands, I emptied my savings from its hiding place in a hollowed-out book, a trick I'd read in some spy novel and adopted with what now seemed like childish naivety. I had just under $4,000, enough to get far away if I was careful. This time, I wouldn't make the mistake of staying so close to Boston. I left the key to my studio apartment in the mailbox with a note apologizing for the sudden departure. I texted Mike that a family emergency had come up and I had to leave town immediately. It wasn't a complete lie. My family was indeed the emergency I was fleeing. At the bus station, I studied the destination board like my life depended on it, which, in a way, it did. East was out of the question. It would take me closer to Boston. South felt too obvious. North meant Canada, which would complicate things with border crossings and documentation. That left west. Seattle. The name caught my eye, glowing on the electronic board. Nearly 3,000 miles away on the opposite coast. A major city where I could blend in, find work, start over. Again. The journey was brutal. 3 days of bus travel, sleeping upright, eating vending machine food at transfer stations, using grungy rest stop bathrooms to wash up as best I could. I had plenty of time to think, to plan, to worry. If my mother had hired a private investigator who had tracked me to Portland, what was to stop her from finding me in Seattle? I needed a more thorough transformation this time. Jessica Bryant had been a hasty creation. My next identity would be crafted with greater care. By the time the bus crossed into Washington State, Melissa Carter was born. She had shoulder-length brown hair, courtesy of a drugstore dye job in a motel bathroom in Chicago, wore glasses, non-prescription, purchased at a truck stop in Minnesota, and had grown up in Phoenix, Arizona. A place I'd visited once on a college spring break trip, just enough to describe it convincingly if asked. Seattle greeted me with uncharacteristic sunshine, the gleaming waters of Puget Sound sparkling as if welcoming me to my new life. I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I was truly alone now, farther from everything familiar than I'd ever been. The sensation was both liberating and paralyzing. I found a youth hostel that didn't ask too many questions, paying for a week up front. The dormitory-style accommodations were far from private, but they were cheap, and being surrounded by travelers meant no one expected me to share personal details. Travelers were transient by nature. No one questioned why I was too. Job hunting in Seattle proved more challenging than in Portland. The city was expensive, competitive, and full of overqualified people seeking work. I applied to restaurants, hotels, retail stores. Anywhere that might hire someone with a thin resume and no local references. After a week of rejections, I was sitting in a small bookshop called Evergreen Books, not to apply for work, but because it was raining heavily outside and I needed somewhere free to sit. The shop was warm, smelled of paper and cinnamon tea, and the elderly woman behind the counter hadn't seemed to mind when I'd settled into an armchair with a book I had no intention of buying. "You've been staring at the same page for 30 minutes, the woman observed, suddenly standing beside my chair. "Either it's the most profound page ever written, or something's troubling you." I looked up, startled. The woman was in her 70s, with silver hair twisted into a bun and kind eyes behind cat-eye glasses. Her name tag read Grace. "Just distracted," I admitted. She said, studying me. "You look like you could use some tea. And maybe a job?" I blinked in surprise. "How did you?" "I've owned this shop for 40 years, Grace said with a small smile. "I know the look of someone in need of work. My assistant just quit to move to Portland with her boyfriend. The pay isn't much, but it includes the apartment upstairs." It seemed too good to be true. "I don't have local references," I said cautiously. Grace waved a hand dismissively. "I trust my instincts more than references." "You have an honest face. And you handle books with respect," I noticed that right away. 2 hours later, I had a job and a place to live. The apartment above Evergreen Books was small but charming, with sloped ceilings, a kitchenette, and windows that overlooked a courtyard garden. Grace lived in the other half of the second floor, separated by a hallway that led to a shared laundry room. "Previous tenant left some furniture," Grace explained as she showed me around. "Nothing fancy, but it'll do until you get settled." "This is more than I could have hoped for," I said truthfully. "Thank you." "Well, don't thank me until you've worked a Saturday story time with 20 preschoolers," she replied with a wink. "Start tomorrow, 9 sharp." Working at Evergreen Books was nothing like my publishing job in Boston or my waitressing gig in Portland. Grace taught me the inventory system, how to order new stock, and the art of recommending just the right book to each customer. The work was peaceful, intellectually engaging, and far removed from the high-pressure environments I'd known before. Grace proved to be an ideal employer, kind but straightforward, interested but not intrusive. She never pushed when I was vague about my past, seeming to sense my need for privacy. Over cups of tea during slow afternoons, she shared stories of her own life, her late husband, their travels, the history of the bookshop, without expecting reciprocal revelations. Gradually, Seattle began to feel like home, or at least as close to home as I could hope for. I developed a routine. Morning yoga, learned from YouTube videos, in my apartment, work at the bookshop, evening walks along the waterfront when weather permitted. I started exploring photography again, using a second-hand camera I'd purchased with my first paycheck. Something about capturing moments, preserving them exactly as they were, helped ground me in my new reality. 6 months into my Seattle life, I met Kyle Bennett. He came into the shop looking for books on Pacific Northwest birds, his passion apparent as he enthusiastically explained his recent sighting of a varied thrush. He had unruly dark hair, glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and a laugh that made you want to laugh along with him. He started coming in weekly, always with a new bird story, always staying to chat. "You should join the Audubon Society walk this weekend," he suggested one day. "Great way to see the city and meet people." My automatic response formed a polite refusal, a vague excuse. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the genuine warmth in Kyle's invitation. Maybe it was the 6 months of relative solitude catching up with me. Maybe it was simply time. "That sounds nice," I heard myself say. "What time?" The bird walk became coffee afterward, which became dinner the following week, which became a friendship, my first real one since disappearing. Kyle was easy to be around, asking questions but accepting deflections, sharing his own stories without demanding mine in return. He was a high school science teacher, passionate about environmental education, comically terrible at cooking but trying anyway. "You're a mystery, Melissa Carter," he said once over pizza. But that's okay. Everyone's entitled to their secrets. The irony, of course, was that my entire existence was a secret. Around the same time, Grace gently suggested I might benefit from therapy. "Before you say no," she said, holding up a hand to forestall my protest, "hear me out. I've noticed the nightmares. The walls aren't that thick. And sometimes you get this look, like you're bracing for an attack that isn't coming. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the genuine concern in her eyes stopped me. I know a good therapist, Grace continued. She helped me after Bernard died. No pressure, but I'll leave her card on your desk. The card sat untouched for weeks. The idea of therapy terrified me. How could I possibly be honest with a therapist while living under a false identity? But the nightmares Grace had mentioned were getting worse, not better. Sometimes I'd wake up shouting, my mother's voice ringing in my ears. Finally, I called the number. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had an office overlooking Elliott Bay, with comfortable chairs and no ticking clocks. At our first session, I sat stiffly, giving only the vaguest answers to her questions. Melissa, she said gently near the end of the hour, therapy only works if you're willing to be honest. Not necessarily with me, at least not right away, but with yourself. I nodded, fighting back tears. For next time, she continued, I'd like you to think about what brought you to Seattle. Not the logistics, but the emotional journey. You don't have to share it if you're not ready, but I'd like you to write it down for yourself. That night, I filled 12 pages in my journal, the truth pouring out of me like a wound finally lanced. I didn't share those exact words with Dr. Mitchell at our next session, but I did talk about my mother, without names or specific details, but with emotional honesty. She was critical, I explained haltingly. Nothing I did was ever good enough. And finally, she told me she didn't want me in her life anymore. That must have been devastating, Dr. Mitchell observed. It was like she confirmed what I'd always suspected, that I was a disappointment, a burden. Over the next few months of weekly sessions, Dr. Mitchell helped me understand the dynamics of emotional abuse, how my mother's constant criticism had shaped my self-perception, how I'd internalized her impossible standards. You've been carrying her voice in your head your entire life, she said during one breakthrough session. Every decision, every achievement, every setback, you've been hearing her commentary, her judgment. How do I make it stop? I asked, desperate. First, you recognize it for what it is, not truth, but her issues projected onto you. Then, gradually, you replace it with your own voice. It wasn't easy work. Some sessions left me emotionally drained, barely able to function for the rest of the day. But slowly, painfully, I began to heal. I started setting boundaries, even in my own mind, when the critical voice arose. I practiced self-compassion, treating myself with the kindness I would show a friend. Photography became a form of therapy as well. Through my camera lens, I captured Seattle in all its moods. Misty mornings, vibrant markets, serene waterfronts, busy streets. I took classes at a community center, learning technical skills while developing my own aesthetic. For the first time in my life, I was creating something purely for myself, not to please or impress anyone else. Grace noticed the change in me. You're standing taller, she observed one morning as we unpacked a shipment of new releases. More present. I smiled, realizing she was right. The hypervigilance that had characterized my first year of disappearance was gradually subsiding. I no longer scanned every room for potential threats. I didn't flinch when the phone rang unexpectedly. I had begun to build a life, a real one, not just a hiding place. 18 months after arriving in Seattle, I held my first photography exhibition in a small community gallery. Cal helped me hang the pieces, Grace catered with homemade cookies and punch, and Dr. Mitchell came to offer moral support. It wasn't a grand affair, but as I watched strangers engage with my work, discussing what they saw in my images, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. These are really good, Melissa, Cal said, standing beside me as we watched the small crowd. You've got a unique perspective. Thank you, I replied, meaning it. Not just for the compliment, but for his friendship, his patience, his acceptance of the boundaries I still maintained. I looked around the gallery at my photographs, at the people who had come to see them, at the life I had built from nothing. For the first time since that fateful birthday dinner, I felt something unexpected, pride. Not in meeting someone else's standards, but in creating my own. I was healing. I was growing. I was becoming someone new, not just in name, but in spirit. Someone who might someday be ready to face the past I'd fled. I had no idea that day was coming sooner than I thought. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Evergreen Books. Rain tapped gently against the windows, creating that cozy atmosphere that bookstores seem to embody on wet days. I was arranging a new display of mystery novels when the bell above the door jingled, announcing a customer. "Be right with you," I called without looking up, positioning the last hardcover at just the right angle. "Amber?" The voice froze me in place. It was a voice I hadn't heard in over 18 months, but would recognize anywhere. Slowly, I turned. My father stood just inside the doorway, rainwater dripping from his coat onto the welcome mat. He looked older, grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. But it was undeniably him. "Dad," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "How?" He took a step forward, then stopped, as if afraid I might bolt. "May I talk to you?" "Please." Grace appeared from the back room, sensing the tension immediately. With one look between us, she seemed to understand. "I'll watch the front," she said quietly. "Take your time." I led my father to the small reading nook in the back corner, my legs moving automatically while my mind raced. How had he found me? What did he want? Was my mother waiting outside? Was this a trap? We sat facing each other, an antique coffee table between us like a demilitarized zone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "You look well," he finally said. "Different, but well." I touched my brown hair self-consciously. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "The private investigator your mother hired lost your trail in Portland. But I kept looking on my own. Checked bookstores in major cities. I remembered how much you loved books. When I saw your photography exhibition announcement online last month, I knew it was you. The style, the perspective, it was unmistakably yours. I'd been careless." In my growing confidence, I'd allowed my real self to shine through my work, creating a beacon for anyone truly looking. "Does she know?" I asked, unable to say my mother's name. He shook his head. "No. I came alone. We're not together anymore." That surprised me. "You left her 6 months after you disappeared." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Your leaving changed things, Amber. Made me see clearly for the first time in decades." "What do you mean?" "When you vanished, your mother was angry at first. Embarrassed to explain your absence to her friends. But I was devastated." His voice cracked slightly. "I hired the PI without telling her, spent hours searching for any trace of you. And in that searching, I started to see patterns I'd been blind to before. How she'd treated you. How she'd controlled our family. How I'd enabled it all by staying silent." He looked down at his hands. "One night, I found your old journals in the attic. I know I shouldn't have read them, but I was desperate for any connection to you. What I read." He shook his head. "I couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't make excuses for her behavior or my complicity. So you left," I said softly. "I confronted her first. Tried to make her see what she'd done to you to us. But she couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge it. So yes, I left. Got an apartment in Cambridge, filed for divorce. It was finalized last year." I sat back, trying to process this seismic shift in the family landscape. My father, who had never stood up to my mother in all the years I was growing up, had finally found his voice after I lost mine. "I'm not here to bring you back or force a reconciliation," he continued. "I just needed to see that you were okay. To tell you how sorry I am." Tears welled in his eyes. "I failed you, Amber. I should have protected you from her criticism, her impossible standards. Instead, I stood by and watched you wither under her judgment, year after year." "Dad," I began, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I've rehearsed this so many times." He took a deep breath. "I want you to know that you were always enough. More than enough. I was too weak to say it then, but I've never been anything but proud of you. Your kindness, your creativity, your resilience, especially your resilience. Look what you've built here, all on your own." Tears streamed down my face now, unchecked. "I didn't know if you'd even noticed I was gone," I admitted. Pain flashed across his face. "I noticed. Every day. But I understand why you left, why you couldn't even say goodbye to me. I hadn't earned that consideration." We sat in silence for a moment, the rain providing gentle background music to our reunion. "Your mother has changed," he said eventually. Your disappearance affected her profoundly. Once the anger faded, there was something else. Regret, I think. Self-reflection. She's in therapy now. I laughed without humor. So am I. She asks about you, if I've heard anything, if I think you're safe. I believe she genuinely misses you. That doesn't erase what she said. What she did. No, he agreed. It doesn't. But she would like to see you if you're ever willing. On your terms, of course. I stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, Seattle continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to my inner turmoil. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to decide now, my father said gently. Or ever, for that matter. I didn't come here as her emissary. I came for myself and for you. I turned back to him. I go by Melissa now. Melissa Carter. He nodded, accepting this with surprising ease. It suits you. My life is here. I have friends, work I care about, therapy that's helping me. I can't go back to Boston. I wouldn't ask you to. But perhaps I could visit sometimes? Get to know Melissa Carter? His smile was tentative, hopeful. Something softened in me then. Not forgiveness, exactly, there was still too much to process for that, but a willingness to consider the possibility of a new relationship. Not a return to the old dynamics, but something healthier, built on mutual respect. I'd like that, I said finally. Maybe we could get dinner tonight? There's a good place down the street. His face lit up. I'd like that very much. Later that evening, after my father had gone back to his hotel with plans to meet again the next day, I called Dr. Mitchell and scheduled an emergency session. The following morning, I sat in her office, recounting the unexpected reunion. How do you feel about your father being back in your life? She asked after I'd finished. Conflicted, I admitted. Part of me is happy to see him, to know he's been looking for me, that he cared enough to find me. But another part is angry that it took my disappearance for him to finally stand up to my mother. To see what had been happening right in front of him for decades. Both reactions are valid, Dr. Mitchell said. You can be glad to reconnect while still holding him accountable for his past failures. And what about my mother? He says she wants to see me. What do you want? I stared out the window at Elliott Bay, watching ferries cross the water. I don't know. The thought of seeing her again makes me feel physically ill. But at the same time, there's this tiny part of me that still wants her approval, I admitted, ashamed. After everything, I still care what she thinks. How pathetic is that? It's not pathetic at all, Dr. Mitchell said firmly. She's your mother. That relationship has shaped you, for better or worse. It's only natural to crave that maternal validation. So what do? You don't have to decide today. Take time to process your father's reappearance first. Set boundaries that feel safe to you. And remember, if you do eventually choose to see your mother, it would be on your terms, not hers. Over the next week, I spent time with my father, showing him my Seattle life, the bookstore, my favorite cafes, the waterfront where I took many of my photographs. We talked for hours, filling in the 18-month gap in our relationship, but also revisiting the past with new honesty. I was afraid of her too, he confessed during a walk along Alki Beach. Not physically, but I couldn't bear her disappointment. So I went along with everything, even when I knew it was hurting you. I appreciated his candor, his willingness to acknowledge his failures without making excuses. It didn't erase the past, but it created space for something new to grow. By the end of his visit, I had made a decision. I would meet with my mother, not in Seattle, my safe space, but on neutral ground. Not to restart our relationship or offer easy forgiveness, but to say the things I'd never been allowed to say, to establish boundaries that should have existed all along. Are you sure? My father asked when I told him. No, I admitted. But I need to do this for me. Not for her, for me. 2 weeks later, I sat in the lobby of a hotel in Denver, a city neither of us had any connection to. My hands trembled slightly as I sipped my water, watching the entrance. Kyle had offered to come with me for moral support, but this was something I needed to do alone. And then she was there, walking through the revolving door, scanning the lobby. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than the giant who had loomed over my childhood. Her hair was different, softer, with gray showing at the temples that she'd previously colored religiously. She wore a simple blue dress rather than her usual designer outfits. Our eyes met across the lobby, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, I raised my hand in acknowledgement. She walked toward me, her steps hesitant, so unlike her usual confident stride. "Amber," she said, stopping a few feet from my chair. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "I go by Melissa now," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She nodded, accepting this correction. "Melissa, then." "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. As she sat down, I noticed the lines around her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands that mirrored my own. For perhaps the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as an indomitable force, but as a flawed, aging woman who had made terrible mistakes. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if healing was possible between us, or if this meeting would only confirm that some bridges cannot be rebuilt once burned. But I knew that whatever happened, I was facing her as an equal. Not as the frightened daughter desperate for approval, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "You look well," my mother said, breaking the silence that had settled between us after I invited her to sit. Her eyes scanned me assessingly, an old habit I recognized instantly. "I almost didn't recognize you with the brown hair." "That was the point," I replied, more sharply than I'd intended. I took a breath, reminding myself of Dr. Mitchell's advice: stay centered, speak my truth, maintain boundaries. My mother flinched slightly but nodded. "I suppose I deserve that." Another silence fell. In the past, I would have rushed to fill it, to ease her discomfort. This time, I let it stretch. "Your father tells me you're working in a bookstore," she finally said. "And that you've taken up photography." "Yes." I didn't elaborate. "He showed me some of your work online. It's quite good, actually. You have a unique perspective." The compliment, so foreign coming from her lips, caught me off guard. "Thank you," I said automatically, then mentally kicked myself for so quickly falling into old patterns of politeness. "I've rehearsed what to say to you 100 times," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "Now that you're here, I find I don't know where to begin. How about with an apology?" The words came out before I could censor them. Her eyes snapped up to meet mine, a flash of the old Diane Wilson visible for a moment, defensive, imperious. But then something shifted in her expression. "You're right," she said quietly. "I owe you that, and so much more." She straightened her shoulders, another familiar gesture, and continued. "I am sorry, Amber, Melissa, for what I said at that birthday dinner. For driving you away. For a lifetime of criticism and impossible standards. It was what I'd wanted to hear for so long, yet it felt insufficient compared to the damage done. Do you even understand what you did? Not just at that dinner, but for my entire life." "I'm trying to," she said. "My therapist says I have narcissistic tendencies." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Apparently, that's therapist speak for terrible mother." "It's not funny," I said coldly. "No, you're right. It's not." She sobered immediately. "I've been seeing Dr. Levine for over a year now. It's been illuminating and painful to see myself through his eyes." "Through your eyes." I leaned forward slightly. "What do you see?" A woman so terrified of her own perceived inadequacies that she projected them onto her daughter. A woman who confused criticism with guidance, who thought pushing you would help you succeed, when all it did was push you away. Her voice broke slightly. A woman who was so busy curating the perfect image of a family that she destroyed the real one she had. Part of me wanted to comfort her, the old part, the people-pleasing daughter who had spent a lifetime managing my mother's emotions. But the new me, Melissa, stayed firm. "That birthday dinner," I said, "when you told me the best gift would be if I left your life. Did you mean it?" She closed her eyes briefly, pain etching lines into her face. "I said it to hurt you. Because I was hurt. Because you weren't living the life I'd envisioned for you, and rather than accept that you had your own path, I lashed out." She looked at me directly. "I didn't mean it. I never thought you'd actually leave. When days passed with no word, when the private investigator couldn't find you, I realized what I'd done. And now? Why did you want to see me now?" "Because I miss my daughter," she said simply. Because I want a chance to know the woman she's become, on her own terms. Because I hope, someday, she might be able to forgive me. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, of the calculated emotional tactics she'd employed throughout my childhood. But all I saw was genuine remorse and fear. Fear that it was too late. I've spent the last 2 years rebuilding myself, I told her. Creating a life where I define my own worth, not based on someone else's approval. It hasn't been easy, but I'm proud of who I've become. As you should be, she said. Your father told me a little about your life in Seattle. It sounds like you've found your place. I have. And I'm not giving it up. I wouldn't ask you to. She hesitated, then continued carefully. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But if you were willing, perhaps I could visit sometimes? Get to know Melissa Carter. The request echoed my father's almost exactly, but my response to it was far more complicated. Could I allow my mother back into my carefully constructed new life without falling into old patterns? Could she truly change decades of behavioral habits? Could I protect my hard-won peace while attempting reconciliation? I don't know, I answered honestly. That would depend on several conditions. Name them, she said immediately. First, we proceed slowly. Very slowly. Phone calls before visits, short visits before longer ones. I need to see consistent change, not just temporary behavior modification to get what you want. She nodded, accepting this. Second, you respect my boundaries absolutely. When I say no, it means no. When I need space, you give it without question or guilt trips. Another nod. Third, you continue therapy. This isn't something that gets fixed in a few sessions. I plan to, she assured me. It's been helpful. And finally, I said, meeting her gaze steadily, you accept that I may never be the daughter you wanted me to be. I won't change my career to impress you. I won't dress differently to meet your standards. I won't date someone because he has the right pedigree or connections. My life is mine now. If you want to be part of it, you have to accept it, and me, exactly as we are. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't deserve a second chance, she whispered. Probably not, I agreed, surprising her with my candor. But I'm considering giving you one anyway. Not for your sake, but for mine. Because carrying this anger and hurt is exhausting, and I'm ready to set it down. She reached across the table hesitantly, her hand stopping just short of mine. I would like to know you, Melissa. The real you. Not the version of you I tried to create. I didn't take her hand, but I didn't pull back either. We'll see, I said. One step at a time. We spent another hour talking, more openly than we ever had before. She told me about her therapy, about the painful process of recognizing patterns she'd inherited from her own mother. I shared selective details about my life in Seattle, my photography, my friends. We kept the conversation light, avoiding the deeper wounds that would take much more time to heal, if they ever could. When we finally said goodbye, she asked if she could hug me. I allowed a brief embrace, stiff and awkward, but a beginning. Thank you for this chance, she said as we parted. I won't waste it. I watched her walk away, her shoulders straighter than when she'd arrived, as if some burden had been lifted. I felt strangely light myself, though not in the way I'd expected. Not euphoric or completely healed, but unburdened. I had faced my greatest fear and survived. I had spoken my truth and been heard. I had set boundaries and had them respected. I had reclaimed my power. The journey back to Seattle felt different from the journey out. I wasn't fleeing anymore, I was returning home by choice. To my apartment above the bookstore. To Grace and her quiet wisdom. To Kyle and our evolving relationship. To Dr. Mitchell and our ongoing work. To my photography and the creative voice I was still discovering. My father called the day after I returned. How are you feeling? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Okay, I think, I answered truthfully. It wasn't as terrible as I feared, but it wasn't exactly easy either. She said it went well. That you might allow her to call you sometimes. I'm considering it, I confirmed. One day at a time. I'm proud of you, Melissa, he said, using my chosen name naturally now. What you did took tremendous courage. Coming from him, the father who had finally found his own courage, the words meant more than I could express. Over the following months, my mother and I established a tentative communication pattern. Weekly emails at first, then occasional phone calls. She respected my boundaries, never pushing for more than I offered, expressing gratitude for whatever contact I allowed. It was strange and sometimes uncomfortable, but also healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. My identity as Melissa Carter remained. I didn't change my name back legally or professionally. The woman I had become in Seattle was real, more authentic, in many ways, than the person I'd been in Boston. But I did begin integrating parts of Amber Wilson back into my life. I reconnected with a few old friends from college, sharing abbreviated versions of my story. I hung a photograph of Northwestern's campus in my apartment. Small acknowledgments of a past that, while painful, had shaped me. 6 months after our meeting in Denver, I held my second photography exhibition. The theme was rebirth, exploring transformation through visual storytelling. I invited my parents, separately, to attend. My father came. My mother, understanding it might be too soon for such a public reunion, sent flowers instead, with a card that simply read, "With admiration and love." The exhibition was well received locally, with one critic describing my work as unflinchingly honest, documenting the phoenix-like emergence of self from the ashes of expectation. Grace beamed with pride, Carl squeezed my hand supportively throughout the opening reception, and Dr. Mitchell attended as a friend rather than a therapist. As I looked around at the gathered crowd, my Seattle family alongside my biological father, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The wound left by my mother's birthday wish hadn't completely healed, and perhaps it never would. But it had transformed from a gaping, bleeding injury into a scar, still visible, occasionally tender, but no longer defining my existence. I had disappeared once to escape pain. Now I was fully present, visible on my own terms, creating rather than hiding. The journey from Amber to Jessica to Melissa had been painful, circuitous, at times devastating. But it had led me here, to this moment of integration and strength. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to vanish from situations that diminish us, to rebuild in spaces where we can grow. And sometimes, the most powerful statement isn't disappearing, but reappearing. Transformed, resilient, and finally, irrevocably free. Have you ever had to walk away from someone or something that was hurting you in order to find yourself? Share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most important growth. If my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, you're never too lost to be found, never too broken to be whole again. Thank you for listening to my journey from Amber to Melissa, from lost to found. I'm grateful for each of you.